We're going to talk about linking the inspection, the contract, the inspection, and the report. And I call it circling the wagons. And I don't expect everybody to agree with me. I don't expect everybody to run home or go out and change what they do. I'm simply presenting a point of view that I've developed over nearly 40 years of being in this industry. You have, in my view, three portions to the inspection. You have the contract, which, as it says, defines your relationship between you and your customer, as well as the scope and limits of the inspection. Then you have the inspection. The inspection is the examination according to all of the terms of your contract. And by the way, your contract, and we'll get into this a little later, should contain and specify a specific standard of practice that you're going to conduct the inspection in accordance with. And then the report documents that you did inspect the home in accordance with all of the terms of the inspection contract. By keeping the circle closed, it helps you maintain uniformity and consistency in the inspection process. It helps you maintain the continuity of the process in report writing, and it reduces the potential for accusations of, but anyway, yeah, and it reduces the potential for accusations or claims of negligence. Inspectors stand or fall by their written documents, and 2/3 of that circle consist of written documents. That is the contract and the written report. And anytime anyone is involved in a claim of negligence or in litigation or dispute resolution regarding home inspection, what matters is what's written, not what you state, not what you say, not what you observe, it's what you write. It's difficult to litigate against clearly stated facts and quantifiable data. If something can't be factually known, state that it cannot be definitively determined and why it cannot be. Very often it may be because it's not readily accessible. We're going to get to the contract first. As great Olympic gold medalist said, better look ahead and prepare than look back and regret. Boy, is that ever true. Your contract has basic elements. It's a mutual agreement between parties, and the parties have to be competent. You can't have a contract with a minor, for instance, somebody who's not old enough to enter into legal agreements, to do something that's legal for valuable consideration. It has to be something legal. Obviously, if I contract with somebody and I tell them I want them to get rid of somebody, and I'm going to give them $10,000, and then they don't do it, I can't sue them for not carrying out the contract because it wasn't for a legal purpose anyway. A potentially dangerous concept in any line of work is we've always done it this way. So just keep that in mind. As I said, I don't expect everybody to run out and change things or to agree with everything I say. But I've heard I don't need to change anything in my contract or report because they've worked so far. Besides, I carry E&O just in case. Well, it has worked so far. The I-35 bridge, Mississippi River Bridge in Minneapolis, St. Paul in 2007 collapsed, killing 13 people. But they'd always done it that way. So that's not something to rest on. The ASHI SOP, standard practice, and most state mandated standards of practice only apply to home inspections. Therefore, separate contracts and reports, as well as applicable standards and established protocols, should always be used for other services. Radon testing, commercial inspection, as it says here, any of these things, home energy audits, pest and vermin inspection, sewer scoping, asbestos samplings, pools and spas, lead paint. The most common one that home inspectors probably do is radon testing. But I used to do commercial. I did asbestos. I was certified to do that. I stayed away from lead paint. Sewer scoping wasn't that big a deal back when I was inspecting, but today a lot of people want it. There was an article in the recent OREP, I think, or maybe it's the ASHI Reporter, on adding home energy audits as something one can do, but all of them should be done under separate contracts and be issued under separate reports with the results under a separate report. All contracts should be reviewed by a competent attorney for adequacy and coverage, compliance with applicable laws, because state law will always take precedent over anything in a contract which conflicts with the law. In some places, for instance, here in Colorado, inspectors can put together what's called, and most of them do, a negotiated contract. And that's a contract that says, I'll perform the inspection at this fee, but we're going to agree to limit my liability to the cost of the inspection. In other words, the most I'm ever going to give back to you is what you paid me to do the inspection. And then they also have the choice of removing that limitation on liability for an additional, say, $750 on top of the inspection fee. It doesn't mean you perform a different inspection. It just means that they have a broader shot at you if they think they have a shot at you at all. What the courts like about a negotiated contract versus a take it or leave it contract is that it gives people a choice. And it has been upheld in one case in Colorado already. Now, some states don't allow it. That's why it says permitted by law. New Mexico recently began regulating inspectors in 2021, and they very specifically say you cannot limit your liability, period. And California has, under their business and professions code, simply says you can't limit your liability to the cost of the inspection, but they don't say that you can't limit it to the cost of the inspection plus $1,000 or some amount of money. So it varies from state to state. And I know some of you folks are inspecting in different states and may have to use state mandated standards instead of the ASHI standard, although in my experience, most standards, be they individual state standards, ASHI, whoever, are basically pretty much clones of the ASHI standards with some changes. And if you get a limitation on liability, it imposes that returning of the fee. It's liquidated damages. It's a fixed and agreed upon amount, and that's all you have to give them back. I've heard home inspectors say, I don't want a long contract. Well, consider that it's short compared to a real estate purchase contract, and we've all seen those. By referring to the SOP, the ASHI standard or state mandated standard in the contractual scope, it effectively specifies certain obligations to the customer as well as limitations of the work without publishing the standard itself, which would be a lot of pages to add. And the rest of the contract, as it says, specifies and defines a relationship between and the duties owed by both parties to each other. I've heard home inspectors tell me over the years that they think a contract which contains legalese isn't friendly. It's just a cover your ass contract. It's not written in plain English. However, in the real world of litigation, a friendly contract without legalese and $2 will buy a cup of coffee with not much left for a tip. And believe me, I have testified on behalf of inspectors in litigation. And I've also written probably nearly 100 letters over 40 years to help inspectors rebut what a dissatisfied customer says or a customer's attorney. And in every instance, 100%, I've gotten them out of it. Why? Not because I'm slick, but because they didn't belong in it in the first place. It wasn't, the customer didn't read the report. The attorney didn't read the report. The attorney didn't read the standard. The attorney didn't even read the contract. They just fire something off saying so-and-so said such and such, and we want some money. Home inspection is a business relationship, not a social relationship. Doesn't mean you can't be friendly and personable. However, if a customer later decides that an inspector was negligent, there will be nothing friendly about what happens. It'll all be legal and all be business. Let me say right here, you'll notice, and some of you are probably aware, I'm using the word customer rather than client. And that's for a reason. I don't know if Harry Rosenthal is still chief counsel for ASHI, but when he was, he told ASHI, take the word client out and put the word customer in. And it's based on the fact that under law in most states, if the state considers what you do a profession, which means you're regulated by the state, it means you have to have certain educational requirements, the state mandates and so on, you cannot limit your liability. You know, a doctor can't limit liability if they cut off the wrong leg or take out the wrong kidney. Engineers can't, architects can't, and so on. So a customer is someone who, and professionals have clients. Customers are people that people in business do work with. And that's why I always use the word customer. Even in states where I help people out where they're regulated by the state, we still use the word customer.
Yeah, customer implies an ongoing relationship. We don't have one.
It does not imply an ongoing relationship. You can be a customer of a store and buy something there one time and never go back.
Yeah, and you're a customer. All I'm saying is we just deal with people one time, maybe a couple of times if we screw up. But the fact is, I'm not an attorney. I don't have a client. I have somebody who has hired me to come out and do a job. That's
right. And that's your customer.
Right.
Never begin an inspection before having a signed contract, and never means never. Most inspections today are, the contract is an electronic signature. People have websites, customers go to them, they agree to the terms and conditions, and those are recognized in courts as being signatures. But I always recommend that if you have a signature page for your contract, make NCR duplicates, make a dozen of them, put them in a folder and put them in your vehicle. Then some copies of the other pages of the contract, but they don't have to be NCR duplicates, so that if your customer gets there and you don't have a signed contract, you can hand them that, they can sign it, you can tear it off, give them the duplicate, you keep the original, and now you have a signed contract. But do not begin the inspection before having a signed contract. Also, don't agree to payment at closing. Payment before delivery of the report, always. I just had one of my subscribers to my consulting service about 2 months ago made the mistake of saying pay me at closing. It was a large industrial commercial building. His customer didn't buy it, just walked away, and he never got paid.
Yep.
So and besides which, as it says, if the transaction doesn't close, payment may never be received, but also tying payment to closing creates the appearance of a conflict of interest. It ties the inspector and the company to a transaction to which neither is a party. Inspectors are not parties to the agreements, contracts, or anything else their customers have with any other people. The simple fact that the inspection is being done as part of a real estate transaction doesn't mean that the inspector is a party to that transaction. The inspector is not. And it diminishes the status of both the company and the inspector as independent entities with no interest in the outcome of a real estate transaction. I never cared whether my customer bought the house or didn't. It was immaterial to me. I didn't have a dog in that fight. I didn't have any skin in that game. Concepts that belong in a contract. The customer agrees, understands the terms, etc. Scope of work, including a reference to the standard that you're going to use. If inspections vary from the ASHI standard or state mandated standard, document the fact in the report. Statement: the inspection will be performed in accordance with the standards of practice of the American Society of Home Inspectors or your state mandated standard, except as modified by this contract and the limits set forth in this contract and the inspection report. And this allows you as an inspector on a case-by-case basis, if you need to modify the report and what you do based on the conditions that are there, and still, even though it may not accord with 100% with the standards, it allows you to do that. Do not provide a copy of the standard of practice. First, I've never done business with anybody. I don't care if it's a car dealership, the repair shop, a doctor that has ever given me their standard of practice. And home inspection standards, and I used to be on that, one time was on the ASHI standards committee years ago. They contain, and even the current ASHI standard, internal contradictions and incorrect terminology, which may be used against an inspector or an inspection company in disputes or litigation. If they want a copy of the standard, they can go find it. All you are referencing is that you're going to conduct the inspection in accordance with it. This is an important concept, and it's on 2 slides. If the customer has a claim or breach or failure of the warranty, and the warranty is that you're going to perform the inspection in accordance with the contract, misrepresentation or negligent inspection, They have to notify the company in writing within 7 days of discovery of the condition, which forms a basis of their claim, and provide the company with 3 working days to reinspect the component or item before the customer repairs or replaces it. This means that, and I can't tell you how many inspectors will tell me, well, I got a call from a real estate agent and they said that the buyer wasn't happy with the inspection and such, et cetera, et cetera. And I always tell them, gently but firmly remind the agent that they're not a party to your contract with the customer, the inspection contract, and you don't want them to become involved, and that the customer has signed a contract saying they will notify the inspector directly. So they can notify you by snail mail or by email, but it's important that they do that. And then this says, unless the repair or replacement is of an urgent nature, in which case the customer shall notify the company within 3 business days and retain all parts and materials for the inspection company, for inspection by the company within 30 days. This right of reinspection is to protect the company and customer from the business practices of some contractors who may base their recommendations to repair or replace components on incorrect, misleading, or false information. If the customer fails to comply with this notification requirement, or to honor the company's right to reinspect, they waive claim against the company with respect to that component or item. That's extremely important, because otherwise you just leave yourself open to all kinds of things. I had a call one time from a real estate agent who said I owed him $150 because he'd paid for one of my customers, his client, to replace a thermostat in the house. Well, the house was inspected when it was about 10 degrees out. It noted in the report that the air conditioning could not be operated at that temperature. Later on in the summer, the people turned on the air conditioning and claimed that it didn't work and the thermostat didn't work, called a HVAC contractor, replaced the thermostat, total of $150. And the agent said, well, I'll just pay it for you. I'll get it from the inspector. If you think you got it from me, you're wrong. He didn't get a dime from me. And he got an earful of what I thought of him. He started demanding it and said he wouldn't refer me. And I said, that's fine. I don't care. I don't work with people like that. The customer needs in the contract to indemnify the inspector and look solely to the company. This is to help protect you. And I hope that all of you are out there are either LLCs or full corporations or have a business model that provides you with a corporate veil to protect your personal assets. The report is for their exclusive use and isn't transferable, and the company has the right to modify the report within 14 hours. That is because you may get back and start looking at photographs as an example and see something, say, oh, damn, I missed that. This is because you can do this because they've agreed to it and you're not a party to their agreements with other parties, say with the seller. It doesn't matter if you perform your inspection on the very last day they have to get the inspection done. And so you add something or make a modification to the report 48 hours later, you're within the contract, and they say, oh, it's too late, we couldn't do anything. Well, that's not my problem. I'm not a party to the contract that has time limits between you and the seller. It's just, I'm not party to that. There's further, this language should be in there. The company is not a party to any contracts that the customer agrees. The company is not party to any contracts, agreements between customers or any third parties, including but not limited to home sellers, et cetera, et cetera. The company cannot and will not provide any advice or direction pertaining to the use of any of the information contained in the inspection report with regard to any such contracts. We probably all had customers who've said, well, should I ask the seller to fill in the blank? Or what should I tell my agent I want to have them tell the seller to do? Sorry, we're not part of that. It would, one, be a violation of our code of ethics, and two, it's a line you don't ever want to cross. Never insert yourself or your company into contracts to which you're not a party. Don't recommend that they do anything before closing. Now you've entered into you're making recommendations about a contract which you have no business making a recommendation about. Before or prior to close of escrow, before the expiration date of the inspection objection deadline. Don't recommend a walkthrough prior to closing to confirm that inspection objections have been corrected. Don't do it. You are not a party to those contracts. And if you hear the emphasis in my voice, it's because this is a great way for you to end up getting in court being sued by the buyer, the seller, and both agents. As I said,
Can
you don't have any.
Can you chime in or give us your recommendation in this market? We're here in Washington D.C. area, and we do a lot of pre-inspections, pre-contract. They call them walk-in talks.
Okay.
I call them consultations because I do not want to be involved in an hour and a half inspection and be liable for something that I might have missed during the inspection because I'm not really doing a full inspection.
All right. Here's what I would say. One, I'll address it. What I'm talking about tonight is a regular inspection with a contractor. I think we all understand that. If you want to do a walk and talk, I can't tell you how many attorneys tell me over the years, do it if you want, but they don't recommend that you do it. Because it becomes a he said, she said at that point, if they want to decide that they're unhappy with what you said. And you didn't tell me about this, so I'm going to sue you. Well, even if you win, you have to pay your attorney. You have to take the time. You have to take the stress. My point of view is I used to get asked to do those. And I just told my prospective customer, we don't do them. We just don't do them. Now, that's not telling you not to do them. I'm just giving you a point of view and why we didn't. But going to what I was saying is that recommending or advising the condition be done prior to close of escrow or so on, it may be construed as an intrusion by the inspector or the inspection company into contracts between the agents and may be subject to litigation, because recommending that if something be done prior to close of escrow, the corollary of this is don't buy the house unless thus and such is not, if thus and such isn't done. So therefore they don't buy the house. The real estate agents lose their commission. The seller loses the sale. And you wind up in court with what's called tortious interference with business. You stuck your nose where it doesn't belong. You don't want to do that. Decisions, they agree that those decisions are their responsibility regarding consulting with other representatives. They indemnify and hold harmless the company at all with regard to the customer's decisions pertaining to the use of the information. An important inclusion. I've had disagreements with this, but I stand by my guns, stick to my guns. We say a company will not return to a property which it is previously inspected for the purpose of re-inspecting to verify that any adverse conditions documented in the course of the original inspection have been modified or corrected, or that any remedial measures have been performed. When you do an inspection and you find an adverse condition in a system component and you put it in your report and you make a recommendation regarding the type of individual, HVAC contractor, whatever, to address it, it's off your plate. You don't have any responsibility for it anymore. They go out and quote, have someone quote, fix it. And then you come back and say, yeah, it looks good to me. And then it turns out not to be right. You just bought it back. You own it. So we don't go back. I recommend that not be done. Now, I know the previous speaker talked a little bit about this. This is a statement that goes into the prototype contracting agreement that my consulting service provides to my subscribers. The customer acknowledges and agrees that any system or component, regardless of age, can fail in part or catastrophically at any time and without any indication of impending failure. Therefore, neither the inspection nor the inspection report will provide any information regarding any predictions of failure of any system or component or of any future adverse conditions, including but not limited to, et cetera, or the remaining service life of any applicable system or component. That is so important so that they can't come back and say, well, you should have told me that this water heater would leak 6 months from now. No. Well, that's the contract. Let's get to the inspection and the report. I think we all know, don't provide copies unless you have authorization to anyone other than the customer. If there's some report software out there now that automatically sends a copy to the real estate agent working with your customer, disable that feature immediately. Your customer signed the contract. They are the only one that you provide a report to unless they give you permission in writing. And today with computerized reports, once you send a copy to your customer, they can send it to anybody they want. They don't need to have you send a copy to the real estate agent. And if they want you to do that before you start the inspection, and they say, there's a place on the signature page on the prospect's prototype contract that says, I authorized the company to provide a copy of the report to so-and-so, and then they have to initial it. Consider a separate report glossary instead of relying solely on the one in the standard of practice. That's because they don't define enough in the standard of practice. And by having a specific glossary and using the terms in the glossary and applying them appropriately, you get the following benefits. It helps create a closed document, keep the circle closed by controlling and defining the terms that are used. It reduces the time required to prepare a report by reducing the amount of written information necessary to include in the report. It reduces a tendency to editorialize or say things you don't need to be saying. It reduces the potential for legal exposure. It reduces the potential for misunderstanding on the part of customers as well as on the part of other parties who may read the report. It helps keep the circle closed, as I said. All right, why does that keep coming over there? Get over there, okay. In the prospects prototype glossary, the term action recommended is in there. And it's defined as regarding adverse conditions documented in the report. It's strongly recommended that further evaluation and any necessary modifications or corrective measure be performed by a qualified individual. And qualified is a defined term. That's why it's capitalized. Contractor or other appropriate individual as soon as possible. If such evaluation reveals other adverse conditions for which modifications or corrective measures are deemed necessary, it is recommended that they be addressed by an appropriate qualified individual at that time. Now that's a lot of words, but if you've got that in a glossary that goes with every report you put out, all you have to say is action recommended. And note at the beginning of the report that glossary terms will be in all caps or whatever you want to put them in. By applying action recommended to adverse conditions documented in the report, it can't be said that the report did not bring adequate attention to or provide sufficient perspective with regard to the importance of addressing an adverse condition. The phrase as soon as possible directly and clearly denotes and conveys urgency. Why? This indication of urgency is based on a court's decision in an inspection lawsuit which the inspector lost. The inspector had said this condition exists. The customer said, but you didn't give us enough information about how urgent it was or how soon we should address it. And we went ahead and bought the house and then this happened. And the court said, we're going to find on behalf of the customer, you didn't give them sufficient information to know how important it was. Well, as soon as possible, that's the end of it. When that is in there in the definition of action recommended, and you say action recommended by a qualified HVAC contractor, roofing contractor, garage door service technician, it doesn't matter. That's helps protect you. You have a duty to your customers to keep both verbal and written statements clear, consistent, concise, objective, thorough, and accurate so that customers can use the report to make their own informed decision. As the previous speaker said, you're not there to make decisions for them, even if they want you to. That's not your job. And it's a dangerous line to step over. Always be familiar and understand your scope of work, including the standard of practice referenced in your contract. It doesn't mean you have to be able to recite it verbatim, but understand it and understand what's in it. Understand your report format. Make sure that it aligns with all of the applicable requirements of your contractual scope of work. As I said before, in the circle, you have a contract that says you'll do this. Make sure that the format that you're going to put the report in reflects that you did what you said you were going to do. Don't assume that the standard referenced in your contract is without internal flaws and contradictions. None of them is. So be aware of what they are and adjust your documents and your work accordingly. It's very easy to work with most of these standards, just need to understand them. However, never use a standard which references material defect, which is a real estate term in law, or which requires inspection for conditions which affect significantly or otherwise the value, desirability, habitability, or safety of the dwelling. There is an inspection association that has that term material defect and defines it as something that would significantly affect the value. Well, first, value is an appraiser. You're not an appraiser. Desirability is so subjective, there's no way I can know what's desirable to another person. Habitability according to what? According to building codes, and safety. While a lot of the adverse conditions we find in systems and components may have safety implications, that does not mean we're performing a safety inspection. And the last thing you want to do is leave the impression with your customer that you're there to make the house, quote, safe. No, you're not. You're finding conditions that you want to bring to their attention. If it's leaking vent connector on a gas-fired appliance, of course there's a safety consideration in that. But it's also an adverse condition. It's an improper assembly. It doesn't meet generally established practices and so on. This is from a Home Inspection Association's online content. Material defect is one which is both observed and deemed by the inspector to pose a safety risk or to jeopardize a real estate transaction. Some material defects do one, not the other. Many do both. They're not interested in the outcome. We've already said that. You have to be unconcerned whether or not an adverse condition might jeopardize a real estate transaction. You don't care about a real estate transaction. It's none of your damn business. It is none of your business. You have been hired to give people information about a property. The fact that it's part of a real estate transaction is immaterial. Inspectors are highly trained, independent, objective observers. They're disinterested third parties. They're not advocating for their customer, and they don't take sides because they don't have any skin in the game. You know who advocates for clients? Attorneys and real estate agents. You're neither. Most of us know how to say nothing, but few of us know when. More isn't necessarily better. What matters is not saying as much as you can, it's thinking before you speak. All houses speak for themselves. Good inspectors know how to listen. Be sure about what you intend to communicate before speaking or writing. It's also important when speaking and writing to know when enough has been said. Be sure what is said is consistent with what is written in the report. Don't say more than is necessary. All of us can get caught up in our own shtick, so to speak, and go on and on. Making decisions for customers is not part of a home inspector's scope of work, and the previous speaker emphasized that. You have a duty to be informative, objective, clear, non-alarmist, so customers can make their own informed decisions. Language matters. As a great writer said, Bernard Shaw, the greatest problem of communication is the illusion that it's been accomplished. There's only one reason vapor barrier has been changed to vapor retarder and waterproof has been changed to water resistant: litigation. Avoid absolute terms. Use reduce the potential for rather than prevent. Use increase the potential for rather than cause or result in. The accumulation of debris in eave gutters increases the potential for moisture damage to roof coverings, roof framing and decking, and other components of construction. Cleaning the gutters doesn't prevent those things from happening. It reduces the potential for them to happen. A good friend of mine who's been a doctor, we went to high school together. We're talking about 10 years ago, and I was explaining to him, and he said, doggone, that's some of the language I've been looking for in my practice for years. When I talk to my patients, that doing such and such will reduce the potential for such and such to happen, but I can't say that it won't happen. When speaking or writing, your terminology must be accurate, technically, must be clear and explained to your customer when necessary. Say, if we can't describe a component or a condition so that other home inspectors understand it, how can we expect customers to make sense of what we say and write? When a technical term is used when speaking with customers, it should be followed with an explanation if necessary. Efflorescence, the TP valve, Expensive soils, no, explain those terms. That they're not people who are going to understand those terms. Now, this goes directly, flies in the face of what the previous speaker said. Avoid using personal pronouns because doing so diminishes objectivity. I, we, the inspector recommends. No, it is recommended. Not I, we observed. No, it was observed. You should. No, action recommended by a qualified. Or in some cases, if you've got a little debris in the gutter, there are certain conditions you may find that rather than being action recommended conditions, may be routine maintenance conditions, a lower level of importance. And those terms can be used. Never allow customers, occupants, or agents to influence or dictate what you write in your report. I don't know how many of you have ever had agents say, well, can't you soften that a little bit? Can't you just change your language a little bit? No. Remember that the ASHI SOP says that you're not required to determine causes of conditions and deficiencies, the strength, adequacy, effectiveness, and efficiency of any system or component. It's not what you're required. You're not required to do that. They do say in the standard, you're required to report those systems and components inspected that are at or near the end of their service lives. Well, keep in mind that we don't know the service history or the use history of systems and components. Therefore, determination of near the end of their service life or at the end of their life should only be based on physical condition, what you see, never based simply on statistical averages or indicated age determined by a date of manufacture. I always use the example, if I'm wanting to buy a used washer and dryer pair, and I go on Craigslist and there are two people that are selling exactly what I want. They're exactly the same age. Are used. And one of them is a single person who travels 6 months of the year. The other people selling it have a family with 5 kids. Which one am I going to buy now that I know the use history? Well, I'm going to buy the one from the guy who's gone 6 months of the year. But we don't know that when we're inspecting a house. We don't know what the use and service history of anything necessarily is. So we don't want to recommend or state that something is nearing the end or at the end of its service life unless we can physically observe that it is. Be consistent. Identify the system and component, describe any adverse condition, make appropriate recommendations. If no adverse conditions are found, consider stating inspected and defining it in an inspection glossary as the system or component was examined in accordance with the contractual scope, using normal operating controls. And all of these capitalized terms are in the Prospex prototype, my company prototype glossary. Describe what you see, not what you don't. We're seldom present when damage or failure occurs. As we said before, when a cause is suspected, but it can't be definitively determined, if you choose to comment about it, consider using the phrase consistent with. Pictures of roof coverings. There are numerous small spots of granule coating damage over the field of the shingles consistent with hail damage. Action recommended by a qualified roofing contractor. Don't design the corrective measures or provide cost estimates. Some people do. Recommend the appropriate type of individual, service technician, etc. We don't like it when non-inspectors tell us how to do our job, and neither do individuals in other industries or trades like it when home inspectors tell them how to do their work. Don't provide cost estimates or cost ranges as low, medium, or high unless you like real estate agents telling your prospective customers how much you should charge. I am not in a position to place a price on another person's work. Period. I won't do it. I find it's offensive. Economy in writing. Here's a picture. Notice there are 7 items. Item 1, no cover plate. Item 2, the equipment grounding conductors are not twisted together, and there's not an equipment grounding conductor coming from those conductors to the body of the metal box. It's not bonded. 3, we've got exposed conductor under the wire nut. It's not down far enough. 4, we have the hold down for the Romex isn't even tightened down. You see the screw isn't tightened. 5, the Romex is twisted under it can be pulled out. You grab hold of that Romex above the box and just pull it right out and disconnect the connections. 6, we have way too much sheathing in the box. It should be cut back, and the paper should be eliminated on the equipment grounding conductors. And 7 is screwed to a stud on a basement frame wall with a drywall screw and then attached with a roofing nail. Now, economy in writing, instead of writing all that, you can say the component is the electrical junction box on the south wood frame wall of the unfinished basement. The box has no cover, is improperly secured to the wood framing, and the wiring methods in the box are not consistent with generally established practices. Action recommended by a qualified electrical contractor, including examination of the entire circuit of which the junction box is part. And that is because the wiring in the box is an extension of or taps into an existing circuit. Therefore, the entire circuit should be examined to determine if additional adverse conditions exist, particularly in areas which are not readily accessible to a home inspector, such as other improper wiring methods or overloading of the circuit. That's why it has there and examination of the entire circuit. That's something you don't have to say very often, but there's a time and a place to do that. The best form of defensive writing consists of a strong contract and inspection report and glossary, clear, concise, consistent, and accurate written descriptions, complete sentences where appropriate, providing clear and appropriate recommendations to address adverse conditions. Avoid imprecise and vague terminology, functional unless you're going to define it, serviceable, acceptable, satisfactory, etc. Appears or seems to be in good condition. No, no, no. Own your language. Speak with confidence. If you don't know, don't wing it. Call, text, email someone who can provide you information. I have my subscribers periodically send me an email or a text from the field with photographs of what they're not sure of, and I call them back and we discuss it. Imprecise language, weasel words, and so on have the opposite effect of good writing. They tend to confuse readers and increase the potential for misunderstanding and claims of negligence. They leave the impression that the inspector is confused or uncertain. You don't rate homes. Avoid fluff comments like, this home is generally well constructed and in reasonably good condition. And you see the little happy, so what, and sad house. There was actually an inspection company that was selling an inspection report back in the 80s. And these were what you were supposed to check by different components that you inspected. It was happy in the house. It was, I mean, the previous speaker may have said, right at a 5th grade level. They didn't say your report should appeal to somebody who's in nursery school. Try to avoid safe, unsafe, risky, hazardous, other terms that actually are engineering terms, and certainly in Colorado, we are not permitted to use. That takes us into the realm of practice of engineering. Somebody asked me one time, well, if I have a sidewalk coming up to a house and there's a difference in elevation between 2 of the stones of the sidewalk, what should I say if I'm not going to say it's a hazard? What am I going to say if I say, you state that there has been differential movement of the sidewalk, which increases the potential for tripping and falling. You didn't hear the word safe, unsafe, risk, risky, or hazardous in that statement. You don't have to use those words. And you don't want to create the perspective on the part of your customer or the sense that you're there to do a safety inspection. Also, just parenthetically, don't go after grandfathered conditions and put them in as adverse conditions. Because if you're in for, as they say in England, in for a penny, in for a pound, in for a dime, in for a dollar. If you're going to start calling out grandfathered conditions as adverse conditions, you better know every condition in that house that is grandfathered, that doesn't have to be changed, and put it in the report. Otherwise, you leave yourself open to, well, why didn't you put this in? Well, why didn't you put that in? No. I know that the ASHI standard says they want you to use the term monitor. I can tell you at least 4 attorneys I've spoken with absolutely go ballistic. Partly because, as it says, it has the potential to be interpreted as a statement that you don't know if it does or doesn't warrant further examination by a qualified specialist. So we'll leave it up to you, the unqualified customer, to decide if it does at some point. They could claim the report should have identified it if something changes. So I just very strongly encourage people not to use that term. Don't include irrelevant and unnecessary information. BTU output, input or output of gas-fired appliance, tonnage of cooling systems, brands or manufacturers, model, serials, numbers, age. Those don't mean anything to your customer. It's just, to me, it's filler. Somebody once said, well, it proves I looked at the component or the water heater, whatever. I said, I've never talked to an inspector who inspected a house and inspected the water heater who was accused of not inspecting the water heater. That argument doesn't fly. To reduce writing time, consider placing an appropriately worded boilerplate implication statement at the beginning of each system section of the report. For example, for grading and surface moisture management, when conditions for which action recommended is indicated in this section of the report are not addressed by appropriate qualified individuals, it may increase the potential for moisture intrusion, wetting of soils adjacent to and beneath foundation, and moisture foundation components and moisture-related damage to and or accelerated deterioration of both exterior and interior components, as well as for personal injury. Then you don't have to place an implication statement after every single adverse condition you find. It's just not necessary. I don't know what that piece of hair is. When speaking about adverse conditions, use informative rather than inflammatory language. Instead of the problem with bad or hazardous wiring is it can result in electrocution or cause the house to catch fire and injure or kill the occupants, state that potential implications of adverse conditions in electrical systems are overheating and electrical shock. Overheating and shock inform without alarming. They allow the customer to use the information to make an informed decision. Fire and electrocution are trigger words, electrocution. They're terms which can result in customers shutting out or not hearing anything else that you've said. They go back and they tell the agent, the inspector said the house is going to burn down and we might die. Consider adverse condition instead of deficiency, deficient, defect, or problem. They're loaded terms. They make decisions. Use of these terms throughout an inspection can lead to the perception that it's a problem house, a defective house, or a deficient house. Those are not words that have to be used. Adverse condition and defining it in a glossary is more than sufficient. In fact, it's far better than using these terms. Consider improper with regard to in a glossary. If you say something's improper in the glossary, it means it's with regard to adverse conditions and system and components not consistent with applicable generally established practices. Generally established practices is defined in a glossary of pertaining to any one or more of the following: historically, conventionally applied and acknowledged methods of installation, assembly, and operation use of residential systems and the related materials and components. Such practices may vary based on those which were applicable at the time of original construction or when modifications to the property were made subsequent to original constructions. This gets you away from ever needing to say it's not permitted, it's not allowed, it's illegal, doesn't meet industry standards, doesn't meet or violates code. Boy, you want to stay away from code in that. I think you all know that. Here's a primary distribution panel. Here's some adverse conditions. You see double lugging of neutrals. We see improper color coding of a neutral conductor here coming in. We see double lugging at the main breaker over here. Improper color coding here. Component, primary electrical distribution panel board. Comment, multiple lugging of neutral conductors, improper color coding of neutral conductor insulation, and multiple lugging of the primary service disconnection circuit breaker terminals. Action recommended by a qualified electrical contractor. That's very simple, very clear, very straightforward. Remember that you're not writing the great American novel. I told you that qualified was defined, and it's having the training, skills, knowledge, experience, expertise, competence, and any special tools or equipment necessary to address adverse conditions and routine maintenance conditions, and where applicable, holding all required licenses and meeting all applicable industry standards and all governmental and statutory requirements. And the reason it's written that way is if you find a leaking trap under a bathroom sink and you put in action recommended by a qualified plumbing contractor or other qualified individual, that means that if the seller of the house says, I know how to fix that, I can run down to Home Depot, get a trap. Why should I pay a plumber $100 to come out and do something I can do for a couple of bucks if he's qualified to do it, if she's qualified to do it? So it gives that bit of leeway for you to say, or other qualified individual where it's appropriate. Always consider who might read your reports.
Kevin, you have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to run through these fast. Negotiated repairs, we don't take negotiations into consideration. That's not our business. Here's information on summary. The previous speaker said basically the same thing. The summary isn't all there is. You're not an advocate for customers. You're not there to protect their interests with regard to transactions. You're not there to ensure the safety or habitability. I call it the Mighty Mouse syndrome. You're not there to here I come to save the day. How often do you review your contract, your marketing materials, your standard? Review one of your own reports, check your reports against your contractual limitations, ask a qualified individual to critique one of your reports, review your inspection report format, modify your format if necessary. To maintain consistency in your work and reduce liability, periodically review documents, make sure that your contract or inspection procedure report and your marketing materials are internally consistent with each other. Pay attention to the way that you present verbal and written information, and then ask yourself, am I keeping the circle closed? That's it. Thank you. I ran through it fast. I read it fast, but there was a lot there. That's 100 slides I had wanted to go through, and an hour's pretty tight to do that.
Kevin, we got about 3 or 4 minutes if you want to put in a little plug for your service.
Oh, well, I will say I started my service 15 years ago. I'd been teaching at the most comprehensive inspection coursework that's ever been taught at a place called Arizona Suntech down in Phoenix. It was a 160-hour course during which we got 30 field inspections done, because that's what the state of Arizona required to get registered or licensed. And we went through all of the materials, and we did National Home Inspectors exam prep. And literally 97, 98% of my students passed the National Home Inspectors exam the first time they took it. So I was proud of that. But after I quit going down there, I would go down every other month for about 2.5, 3 years. And I always told my students they could call me if they had questions. Well, I realized nobody was really doing this for inspectors. So I started this company called Prospecs. It's a service by subscription. And I provide business documents, prototype contract, description of services, general information, report glossary, and so on. I've now written almost 40 articles called Prospect Perspectives on various aspects of home inspection. Those are available. My subscribers can call me, email me, text me from the field. If they have questions, I'll give you a brief. Inspector in New Mexico, Las Cruces, called. Flat roof, garage. Everything looked good on the roof covering. Had a skylight in the garage. Had a steel frame around the skylight where it came through the garage ceiling. There was rust on the skylight steel and a little bit of staining on the drywall. And yet everything was just tight as could be on the roof. He said, what's going on? I said, does it snow in Las Cruces? He said, occasionally. Does it get below freezing? Yes. I said, what happens when you bring a car with a hot engine into that garage with snow on it and close the door? It evaporates. And where does it condense? On the coldest thing it can find in the ceiling. And that's the steel of that skylight frame. He said, oh, geez. He said, that's perfect sense. So he got off the phone and he called me that evening. He said, well, you made me look good. I said, what do you mean? He said, I told the realtor who was standing there, the realtor was there for the customer's agent. And when I explained it, she looked at me and she said, you mean that you can call somebody right now when you're on the inspection and get information like that? He said, yeah. She said, why don't the other inspectors in Las Cruces do that? And he very wisely said, I don't know. Why don't you ask them? And I also write letters to get people butt out of the fire. Because as I said earlier, virtually every time I've had to help somebody, it's the claim that has been made has been absolutely without foundation or basis. But they don't know how to write that letter. And I do. In fact, I've almost got a template for it. And my own attorney, who I've known for years and was the attorney for the Rocky Mountain chapter of ASHI, said, I write better letters than he does because I know more about the business than he does. And he said, you write like an attorney. I said, well, what I do is I write the letter for the person, send it back. They put it on their letterhead. So it appears that they wrote it. But when somebody reads it, they say, well, he didn't write this. He had an attorney write it, which is exactly what we want them to think. And in every single instance, the biggest one was about a $10,000 claim. And once a letter from an attorney, and once I sent the letter to my subscriber sent it to the attorney, never heard another word from them because they were wrong. And they were wrong on 4 or 5 counts in what they claimed or alleged in their letter demanding $10,000 or they take it to court. I don't guarantee that I can do that. If you really screw up here in Colorado, I tell them if you're using the prospectus contract and they're limiting the liability, give them the check back. And that's it.